Islamic text and Persian language. After spending a year at Damascus University consolidating her knowledge of the Arabic language, she went on to pursue further Islamic studies and Farsi at Jamiatul Zahra Seminary in Qom, Iran. She has translated and edited numerous publications from Arabic into English and edits academic works for publications on a regular basis. She has also worked on the English subtitling of various Arabic films and documentaries. As a lifelong student, her current areas of interest include Islamic ethics and spirituality, interfaith relations, and parenting. Please welcome her with a loud Nara Salawat.
سورة المباركة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. صلوات. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I feel honored to have been given this opportunity by SICM to, inshallah, continue in the thread of social justice that Professor Iqbal Asaria began a few nights ago. And while we await his last installment in the series, where he looks at the quest for social justice in our modern contexts, I'd like to retrace our steps right back to the time of revelation and remind ourselves of the Qur'anic injunctions for social justice. I'd like to especially look at the language that the Qur'an uses and to look at the concept of social justice, the way that the people of the time would have understood it, the way that they would have read the Qur'an, and the way that it would have appealed to the people of the time, because they also had the standard bearers of social justice, the interpreters of the Qur'an who lived among them. So my aim is to highlight the gravity and weightiness of the subject purely through the linguistic aspect and the linguistic analysis, and to highlight that for people who understood that principal message of the Qur'an, standing by and watching the injustice leading up to the events of Karbala would have been unbearable. So when you look at justice in the Qur'an, when you look at justice in the Arabic language, there's, I'd say, about 3 words and their various derivatives that are there for justice. So you've got the word insaaf, for example, which is translated as justice, the word qist and the word adl. Now, insaaf is used it's borrowed from Arabic, and it's used in Urdu, in Persian, in Turkish, in Farsi, of course, and other languages. But insaf is not actually used in the Qur'an. So it comes from the word nisf, to mean half, and to share things equally, and it can mean equality. But the Qur'an doesn't use insaf for justice. So the Qur'an uses mainly adl and qist. And they're much more comprehensive, but so much is lost in translation. So when they're translated into English, they're translated interchangeably as justice or equity or fairness, one for the other. But they're actually quite different when you break it down and when you look at their usage in the Qur'an. So each of them is mentioned about 27 times, but there's general distinctions. So when you look at how the word qist is used in the Qur'an, you find that it's used in practical things, in practical procedures. It's used for weights and measures. Allah uses it to talk about dealings with people. When he talks about orphans, he talks about dealing with qist. When he talks about anything that requires meticulous procedures, he talks about qist. Whereas, and the means to justice, he talks about qist. Adl is used in a much more general sense. So when to speak with justice, for example, to judge with fairness, to pass fair judgments, etc. So some people have said that adl is substantive justice and qist is procedural justice, etc. There's another word as well that Allah uses. He uses the word mizan in the Qur'an. So he says, for example, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تُخْسِرُ الْمِيزَانَ. So mizan is the general balance in creation. That Allah's created everything balanced, and things shouldn't go out of sync and shouldn't go out of balance. And our aim is to restore that balance. Now, when it comes to divine justice, Allah uses both words for himself. He uses the word muqsit to call himself just, and he also uses the word adil. And the fact that these are two separate names shows us that these are two separate things that merit two separate positions. Even when we've got the famous hadith of when the 12th Imam reappears, that يَمْلَأُ الْأَرْضَ قِسْطًا وَعَدْلًا, that he will fill the earth with qist and adl, كَمَا مُلِئَتْ ظُلْمًا وَجَوْرًا, as it was filled with injustice and oppression. So again, people will translate it as injustice and equity or justice and equity, etc. But there's actual meaning to both of them, which we'll uncover as we look at the actual ayat of the Qur'an. So Allah in Surah 21, Ayah 47, he says, وَنَضَعُ مَوَازِينَ الْقِسْطِ لِيَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ فَلَا تُظْلَمُ نَفْسٌ شَيْئًا. He says, and we will lay out the scales of qist, of justice on the day of judgment, so that no soul is treated unjustly. He says, لَا يُظْلَمُونَ فَتِيلًا. They're not going to be treated unjustly by even as much as the thread that you find inside a date stone. So that groove inside the date stone, the thread that's found inside there, they're not even going to be treated unjustly by that much. That's how his qist is. So it's a very meticulous justice, qist. So where adl is a general justice, qist is where no injustice is done, right? It's almost, I wouldn't say it's the opposite, but it's ensuring that in getting justice, there's no injustice in every step of the process. Now, when Allah talks about himself, when he refers to his names, it's there for us to adopt those names. So we've been created as Khalifatullah. We have a mandate on our shoulders to adopt those names and then to reflect them, to manifest them in society, that we have them in us and to activate them. And you see in the Qur'an the way that Allah's addressing us with this mandate of justice. It's quite a heavy and weighty thing. So in the first ayah, if you could just pull up the first slide for me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Hadid, in ayah 25, he says, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمَ الْكِتَابِ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. Okay, he says, we sent our messengers with clear signs and the scripture and the balance, the mizan, so that people would uphold justice. It doesn't say so the messengers can uphold justice, the prophets can uphold justice, or the leaders, or the judges, or anybody else, but so people can uphold justice. It spells out that the point of revelation, the point of guidance, the point of divine guides is there to activate something within us that people can bring about in this world. And it reminds us that there's an inner compass that we have, an inner moral compass, and that justice is very innate inside us. If you look at children, for example, from the minute they can talk, one of the first things they'll say is, it's not fair. You know, they're sticklers for fairness. As much as they love to share, they're also sticklers for fairness. They'll count every chocolate chip in their half of the cookie to make sure that you've been fair, because it's innate in us to want fairness. You'll see even the most oppressive tyrant will still believe that he is just. He may be oppressive and his moral compass is skewed, but he likes to be called just. These tyrants, they like to be called peacemakers, even if it's after their death, but, you know, this is how they tout themselves. Thieves, you know, they may rob something altogether, and their sense of morality is skewed, but they want a fair share of the proceedings, of the lootings, because they have that innate sense of justice. So that's something that's one of the most primordial things in us, is that sense of fairness and justice. And as per the verse of the Qur'an, the Prophet's main function was to inculcate belief in Allah, belief in a day of judgment, in some kind of accountability, but to activate that spirit of justice and equity towards our fellow human beings. Now, Quranic commandments, as we'll see, have been very, very specific and very emphatic when it comes to justice. Allah does not mince his words when it comes to justice. So if you look at the second slide, the second ayah I'd like to look at is from Surah An-Nisa, ayah number 135. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the believers. So he's addressing anyone who professes belief, people who call themselves believers. He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Oh, I hope it's big enough. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Kunu qawwamina bil qist. Okay? So he says, it's been translated as uphold justice. But that does absolutely no justice to the Arabic. So he says, Kunu qawwamina bil qist. The word qawwam in Arabic is from the pattern fa'al. Okay, fa'al is an adjective called mubalagha. It's used to describe any action or a person who does an action repeatedly, every day, as a profession. Okay, so what's the Arabic word for bread? Khubz, right? So somebody who makes bread day in, day out as a profession is called a khabbaz. Okay, tayr, for example, is a bird. Or ta'ir is anything that flies. But someone who flies as a profession every day, a pilot, is called a tayyar. Ghusl or ghasala is to wash, right? Someone who washes as a profession, washes clothes, is called a ghassal. So from that pattern of fa'al, Allah is saying, qawwameen, kunu qawwameen bil qist. So not uphold justice, not be just, keep on maintaining justice. Be upholders of justice. He doesn't say aqimul qist, like aqimul salat. He says, kunu qawwameen bil qist. Be constant, persistent maintainers of justice as a matter of course. This should be your daily grind. Daily, meticulously, you have to adhere to justice. There's no one-offs. Have to keep on doing it, keep on revisiting it, make it your purpose. Kunu qawwamina bil qist. Be constant standard bearers of justice. Then he says, shuhada'a lillah, witnesses before God. Now this has got two meanings. First of all, we're witnesses over our own actions. Do we have confidence in our own sense of justice that we can stand before Allah and say, you know what, I've done my best. I judged this with fairness, or I treated this person fairly. So he's saying not only maintain justice, but be able to bear witness in front of Allah that you did it. So that's the first meaning. The second meaning is that we're shuhada over the people. Just like the Prophet was this living example of moral rectitude and fairness among us, so are we believers. We have this mandate to be witnesses for that, to reflect that in our behavior too. The Prophet ﷺ said, each one of you is responsible towards all other people. So it's a huge thing to be shuhada lillah, what Allah is asking us to do. Then continues, shuhada lillah walau ala anfusikum wal walidain wal aqrabin. Even if it be against your own selves that you're having to be just or tell the truth, and in spite of your parents and close ones. Now that's a really heavy thing, because in the Qur'an, other places where Allah has mentioned parents, it's all to do with ihsan, lower the wing of humility, be kind to them, don't reproach them, don't anything. But when it comes to justice, when it comes to meting out justice and judging fairly, it says walau ala anfusikum wal walidain. So when it comes to justice, and this is where people falter the most actually, this is where your sense of justice becomes perverse, or where you don't know anymore what's right and what's wrong, is when loyalties come into question, when family ties come into question. So essentially it's saying when it comes to justice, there's no such thing as family comes first. My brethren, there's none of that. It's all It's all about justice in the sight of Allah. It's not that close associates come first. I can bend the truth, I can bend the law, I can look the other way if it's my parents doing something, I can look the other way if it's my family doing something. So again, it's very clear cut here. And Allah's saying exactly where people falter. There's no room for partisanship. There's no room for nepotism. And we know from what Iqbal Uncle said that these were things that, for example, Muawiyah used. He created bonds of family to pervert justice. He created non-existent bonds of family between himself and Ibn Ziyad to pervert that within someone, to make them question, what's right and what's wrong and where loyalty lies, for example. So he says, wal aqrabin, even associates, colleagues, people we consider our own. Sometimes we side with our own, even though our own are wrong. Now, it's natural to want to socialize with our own. It's natural. Birds of a feather flock together, right? Sometimes when you go to remote parts of British countryside and you see a brown face, you get really happy because, you long to be with your own. But when it comes to justice, there's no room for that. There's no room for my own, or to put filial relations or associates before the course of justice. So Allah is very clear about that. Then he continues, he says, إِن يَكُونُوا غَنِيًّا أَوْ فَقِيرًا, regardless of social class, regardless of wealth, whether he's rich or poor, Allah is above them both. Allah deals with them both. So are rich and poor really equal before the law in our systems? Are response times to how the rich and the poor are treated the same? Are people who are high profile treated the same as people who are not so high profile? Are victims marginalized even further in the justice system because they can't afford decent legal representation? Right now, as we can see from the Black Lives Matter movement, the way that a white man speeding in a nice car in a nice neighborhood is treated is very, very different to the way a black man driving in a not so nice neighborhood is treated, where one is let off with a warning, the other one's shot. So how is our system of justice perverted just because the other person is rich or poor? So Allah makes that very clear. And there's several examples actually within the life of the Ahlul Bayt and as well as in the Qur'an where this is disparaged. There's an anecdote that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the start of his mission, he would sit with Ammar and Bilal and these people who are known as, nobodies, really, simpletons, outcasts in society. And he would sit with them, and certain people of the Quraysh or the newbies, the newly converted people who thought, they'd done a great thing, they would come and say, if you didn't kind of associate with them, it would raise your image a little bit. You need good PR so more people get attracted to the deen. Why don't you kind of not hang out with these people so much? Sit with other people. And, once Omar came to him and said, why don't you at least try to humor the Quraysh? Just test to see if the Quraysh are sincere in wanting to convert. For a few days, don't sit with these people. And the verse was revealed in the Qur'an, don't turn away from those who implore him night and day, otherwise you'll be unjust. So it's seen as, a very grave thing to turn away from people just on the basis of their social class. And this theme of marginalized people, or mustad'afin, or fuqara, it crops up in the Qur'an, and the prophets were condemned by their people for associating with the poor. For example, we've got the Prophet Nuh, who the chieftains of his time or his society say to him, وَمَا تَرَاكَ اتَّبَعَكَ إِلَّا أَرَاذِلُنَا. We don't see anyone following you apart from the simpletons, apart from the despicable people. And we see in the Qur'an the Quraysh, after the conquest of Makkah, when they would go for Hajj, and the people who saw themselves as custodians of the Kaaba would kind of camp or go to a different place to Arafat where the rest of the people were. They would camp on higher ground or towards Muzdalifah. And Allah addresses them and says, ثُمَّ أَفِيضُ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَفَاضَ النَّاسِ. Surge down from where the people surge down. Who do you think you are that you think you're better than the people just because you're custodians of the Kaaba? You think you can have, different accommodation to them. So he says, أَفِيضُ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَفَاضَ النَّاسِ. So you get these recurring themes in the Qur'an about the marginalized people not to be sidelined, and for the prophets, that the prophets were doing a good thing by sitting with them. Then the ayah continues, فَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا الْهَوَىٰ أَن تَعْدِلُوا. Don't follow your desire. Don't let your desire turn you away from doing justice. Right? The Qur'an's acknowledging that there is implicit bias. There is such a thing as personal bias. Of course you have your desire. Of course you have something that you naturally lean towards. But it says don't let that. Don't let that turn you away from doing justice. And don't let it stop you. So it's very, very subtle. And at the same time, very specific in what it's saying. And in this particular verse, it's saying that the reason why people end up being unjust is because of their unrestricted love, because of their bias for close ones, for sucking up to the rich, whatever it may be, favoritism. So this verse is to do with that aspect of why we're unjust. The second verse I'm going to look at looks at the other reason for why people are unjust. In Surah Ma'idah, verse number 8, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a very similar ayah. If you can just move to the next slide. It says, again, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, Kunu qawwamina lillahi shuhada'a bil qist. Very similar. Okay, it starts off the same. And then it says, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. Says, and do not let hatred or aversion for a people, for a particular group, cloud your judgment. Okay, just because you don't like a community, you don't like a group of people, don't let that stop you from being fair. And it acknowledges that there may be people you have hostility against. There may be people you have grudges against. There may be people that you don't like. But do not let that stop you in the face of justice. And we see this all the time. People's phobias getting in the way of administering justice properly, letting it get the better of them. Now here as well, if you look at the language where Allah says, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ, okay, He uses a very emphatic tone. First of all, you've got the la, which is a la of prohibition. Then you've got the noon. You've got يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ. That noon shadda is very special. It's called noon at-tawqid in Arabic, which means the noon of emphasis. You add it onto the end of a verb and it makes it very emphatic. So it's not just do not let it cloud your judgment. It's absolutely do not let it cloud your judgment. So Allah is very emphatic here. Do not let aversion for a people cloud your judgment. And it doesn't just say Allah ta'dilu, that don't do this. It emphasizes it further and says i'dilu, be just. Okay, so it's not just saying don't do something, it's saying the opposite as well. So it's a triple emphasis on that. La yajrimannakum alla ta'dilu i'dilu. It's like he's putting an extra exclamation mark there, that make sure you are just, even if you don't like people. That's no reason to be unfair that you don't like them. So just to sum up the two ayat, that you've got the concept of adl, of being just, that's there throughout. But qist has its own special place that makes sure you are not unjust. Every step of the way, in every little thing, make sure you're not unjust. And this is reflected very well in Nahjul Balagha. When you read Imam Ali alayhi salam's sermons, he talks very much about equitable procedures and equitable processes. When you read his letters that he would write, his advisory letters to his counselors in different places, he goes into meticulous detail about how these processes should be. He's not so concerned about the outcome, right? Because in a world where there's free will, you're not going to be able to guarantee a just outcome necessarily, or a perfect outcome that yes, justice has been done. But at least what's in your control, Imam Ali advocates that. And the Ahlul Bayt, as we can see from stories about their lives, they were masters at being able to separate personal matters from justice. There was once, at the time when the Prophet was in Medina, there was a theft that occurred in a Muslim man's house. There's a Muslim man called Qatada, and his armor was stolen. And there was a trail of flour leading to the man who had stolen it. But at the end of the day, there were two people charged with the theft because they weren't sure which one of them had stolen it. So there was a Muslim man and a Jewish man. And the Muslims were worried that if the Jewish man was found innocent and the Muslim man was found guilty, that would really humiliate the Muslims in front of the Jews, that the Muslims had thieved, right? This man had committed a crime and the Jewish man would be found innocent. So the Muslims came to the Prophet and said, look, let the Muslim guy go. Let him be acquitted. This is going to be such a disgrace for the Muslims. If the Jew is found innocent, this is, Islam will look so bad. And the Prophet refused. He considered an unjust verdict to be a disgrace for Islam. And then the people came back and they argued and they said, well, look, the Jews have done so many things. They've been so cruel to us, They've done lots of bad things to us. Now, if we, say this Jew is convicted wrongly, so what? They've done a lot worse things to us, Just convict, the Jew can be guilty and let the Muslim go because they've done way worse things to us. And the Prophet said, justice and honest decision have nothing to do with past sufferings. It seemed humiliating to the people at the time, but it immortalized high ideals and justice of Islam when the Prophet took that stance. And the Jew was found innocent and the Muslim was found guilty. But it wasn't for the Prophet to pervert the course of justice just so Islam would look good. So the commandment to us is not just to uphold justice, but not to let justice happen on our watch. Not to let justice happen anywhere around us, even if it comes to non-Muslims. So, to be that meticulous, in Surah An'am, ayah 52, Allah says, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إن الله يحب المقسطين. It says Allah doesn't stop you from respecting those who are not at war with you on account of your religion. And you should show them kindness and deal with them equitably, with qist. Inna Allah yuhibbul muqsitin. So this is where Allah says Allah loves those who do good, regardless of religion, regardless of who the people are. To be that meticulous and conscientious with your justice. So I may not be racist, but do I put people in check around me who make racist comments? Do I protest discrimination in institutions, or is it simply that, well, I'm not? That's what's required of a believer, to not let any injustice occur on their watch. So this fairness is a minimum requirement of the Qur'an on an individual level, on a family level, on a society level, regardless of color, creed, or religion. And our role models, the paragons of the Qur'an, were so sensitive to injustice. When you read some of the anecdotes from their lives, it makes you wonder how they had such a sharp radar for injustice. There was once a man who came and who was a guest of Imam Ali alayhi salam at his house. So he was staying with Imam Ali. And then in the course of conversation, he mentioned that he wanted Imam Ali alayhi salam to represent him in a case that he had, and he wanted Imam Ali to solve it for him. And Imam Ali immediately said, well, if that's the case, then you can't be my guest anymore. You'll have to leave, because the Prophet advised that unless the other guy is also my guest, I can't have you as my guest and also represent you. He said, to make an impartial decision is one thing, and hospitality is another thing. One is based on divine law, and the other is based on sympathy. So I can't have that. We know that the Prophet ﷺ, when he sat with his companions, even just sitting with them, he would make sure to glance at them all equally so nobody felt ignored. To that level was he just, and even his glancing at all his companions fairly. You look at Imam Ali alayhi salam's circular to one of his officials, and he says, sharpen the tip of your pen. Don't leave any spaces between the lines. Avoid writing in a slanted ornamental style. Keep to brevity and save paper. Don't waste any paper because that comes from the public treasury. So to that level of justice and fairness and meticulousness about not wasting people's money. There's another anecdote that once Imam Ali's his shield went missing, and he saw it in the marketplace being sold. So he went to the man and said, well, that's my shield. And the guy said, well, no, it's mine. And eventually the matter reached the court. And this was at the time of, during the caliphate of Umar. So some people say that the case was taken to Umar, some say it was a qadi. In any case, the case is taken to the court, and the judge addresses Imam Ali alayhi salam and calls him Abu al-Hasan. And he calls the other man by his name. And Imam Ali straight away, before the proceedings have even started, the Imam Ali stops and threatens to walk out, because he said, before this has even started, you've been unfair. You called me by a more respectable name. You called me Abu al-Hasan and you called him by his name. That's not fair. So even when it was in his favor, the man was respecting him, but still he was so meticulous that fairness had to be meted out before the proceedings had even started. The judge had to address them both equally. So he was that sensitive to injustice being done. They were so sensitive that even with those who wished to kill them, we know that even after Imam Ali alayhi salam has been struck, it still occurs to him that his assailant should be, that his chain shouldn't be too tight and he should be fed and quenched. I mean, when does that ever occur to people? Same with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The man who's apprehended him and stopped him in his tracks and stopped him from going to Kufa, it occurs to him to treat him with dignity and give him his right of water and his animals and everything. They were that careful with their duty to their fellow human beings. So as paragons of justice, what we see in them, we see that even though in society the slogan of social justice is raised by every government, by every system, everybody thinks they're just. But unless the strength of it comes first from the roots of eradicating injustice, you may sing about justice, but if you're not committed to the qist side of things, of first uprooting the injustice, then it doesn't go very far. You have the slogan mongering of a country for all people and a party for the working people, whatever it is. But again, unless the injustice is rooted out from within, it doesn't get very far. And you see that by contrast, the slogans of these paragons of justice who walk the talk and were embodiments of these ayat, you had slogans such as Hayhat minna dhilla, that never would we succumb to the humiliation of condoning injustice. Or mithli la yubaya' mithluhu. It's not just I will not pay allegiance to Yazid. It's the likes of me would never pay allegiance to the likes of him. The likes of me would never pay allegiance to an unjust system. And Imam Hussein's parting, his final words, as we know from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and Imam Muhammad Baqir, he said, "Iyaka wa dhulma man la yajidu alayka nasiran illa Allah." Beware of oppressing or being unjust to anybody who has no helper save Allah. So these are, you see that the impetus that Imam Hussein's stand gives to people who are marginalized or people who are downtrodden in society is especially poignant because it comes from this place of eradicating injustice and this place of qist, of being meticulous and conscientious, where they actually walked the talk. And it gives power to the individual, it gives power to the common man, it gives power to the few when you look at ayat like this that put the mandate on each of our shoulders. Thank you for listening. Jazakumullah.
questions from the ladies' side? Any questions from the gents' side?
Nazmina, thank you for that
Thank you.
excellent presentation. I'm happy that I was able to persuade you to do this. So, you talked about social justice, and that is quite correct. But as we move on, we're looking at certain patterns of injustice, which perhaps sometimes we are not aware of. So, for example, in a society where racism is prevalent, people who are practicing racism may not be aware that they are doing anything wrong. So here, perhaps there is another aspect that if you become aware, it becomes your duty to make the others aware that, look, although you may think it's normal, but it is not. It is unjust. In a similar way, when we go behind what is apparent, we find that the way society operates, certain things happen which are unjust. So, for example, if you look at France, it says that because we are a secular state, we don't consider religion, we don't take it into account, we are completely neutral. But when you look at Paris, for example, you see that the poor Muslims are concentrated in a ring of very poorly ghettos around Paris. Now, clearly there is something here to sensitize the people that by your actions, although you profess not to care, something unjust is happening. And in so many other circumstances, we see that across the area. So is there any reflection on that kind of injustice here?
The covert underlying injustice in institutions.
May not be perceived by the people, yeah?
It's not perceived by the people who are living it, but surely by the people who are doing it. Yeah, well, obviously everybody thinks they're just.
So you see, for example, when they took large number of slaves across the Atlantic, right? They were thinking this is the right thing to do for them. They didn't think of the consequences of the places which they raided for slaves. Or the other thing which happens sometimes is that you try to demonize the people. So in the Crusades or in slavery, you try to show that really these people were savages, and so we are doing them a favor by taking them across. Now that's a very difficult narrative to challenge and defeat in real time. Yeah? But then you find champions coming up slowly, say, look, guys, this is not what it is. This is unjust. And then slowly whole battle starts. Same way with apartheid and things like that. Now this is something which obviously also we find in Muslim history, that at certain points in time, a lot of scholars say, look, these guys are in power and we should respect them, full stop. Now it takes a lot of courage to say no. And this is where Imam Hussein's contribution comes, that there is a limit to how much you will condone.
How much you'll condone. And also I feel that, I mean, these days it's maybe the power of the common man is being harnessed in real time, as you say, through the power of things like social media. You know, now you find movements gaining impetus much faster, like the Black Lives Matter thing, or like, you know, other injustices, the refugee crisis, because they gain impetus very fast and spread very fast, where, you know, they're not maybe their concentration to a certain geographical location isn't limited there or the case. So maybe things like that are empowering the common man to be able to have that courage to speak out.
If I can add to what Iqbal is saying, I mean, you know, he talked about slavery in Paris. Maybe a little far removed. But for us, for example, I can walk into what we call a Costa or a Starbucks and pay a $3 or $4 for a latte or cappuccino, right? And I have a little consideration for the few pennies the coffee farmer may have got. And I know the coffee farmer probably doesn't have running water, dependable electricity. Yet, there's little thinking I have got about what's gone into that thing. So
and now, alhamdulillah, that we have choices, like here we have choices, or, how far the fair trade thing goes, or, So again, when you look at what Imam Ali alayhi salam wrote, or even what the Qur'an says, it starts with the little things. I don't think there's room to belittle things as small or insignificant. When it says, for example, أَن تُؤَدُّ الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهَا, something simple like, giving back trust to their rightful owners. Or Imam Ali alayhi salam, he defines adl as أن تَدَعُ الْأُمُورَ مَوَاضِعَهَا, to put things in their rightful place. I mean, these are they may seem tiny things, sharpen the tip of your pen and write small and write, but every little thing that we do makes a difference. And I think if people realize that as Khalifatullah, it's not just about the big ripples you have in society, or the big, the protests that you attend or things like that, but in every little aspect, from buying the coffee and making sure that it's fair trade, or whatever the case may be, it has, at least from the procedural aspect, you can say that you were muqsit, that you had qist in what concerned you.
Thank you for that lecture. I have quite a specific question. It's often when we give charity, we're told to prioritize our own people first, be it Shia charities, Muslim charities. So that can be quite confusing when it comes to being just. Can you tell me how we would approach that?
See, if you live in a society where you're making use of the resources of that society, you're aware of the problems of that society, you know of, to know, for example, of homeless people who are sleeping in the cold in my own town, it doesn't make sense then to keep the resources you have at hand now and keep them aside and say, well, tomorrow I'll send it elsewhere. When there are needy in your locality, or when a hand is stretched towards you, it doesn't make sense to say no. So there's no, when it comes to giving, when it comes to charity, there's nowhere that says, prefer your own. There's so many instances we have in a hadith when people would come to the ai and ask. For example, we have such a thing as a harvest festival. Right? In the Qur'an, it talks about Yawm al-Hasad. When you harvest your crops, people were told to give out handful by handful to any needy that passed on the day of harvest. And they were told, actually, don't reap your crops at night, because then people won't know what you've harvested, and there won't be people who come to get from you. So harvest during the daytime, so when people come, you can give out. And whoever comes, give them handfuls, right? And people would ask, does it matter if we don't know the person, or they're not from our creed, they're not Shia? And the Imams would say, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you don't know them. It doesn't matter so long as they're needy and they come to your door, you have a duty to give to them. So it doesn't say anywhere that there should be preferential treatment, or that you should prioritize your own, or send the money, I don't see why we can't do both, frankly, with the amount we have, alhamdulillah. But if a hand is outstretched towards you, and if you know of neediness around you, there's no reason why not.
Any other questions? Final questions?
Nazmina, thank you very much. I personally, I have found that in my formal or informal counseling, the thing that I find most difficult is when two apparently God-conscious individuals both have a mindset inbuilt that what they are doing is just, and yet there is if you like, difference of opinion there. And for someone else to come and arbitrate or help with the decision making, it almost puts yourself into a very awkward position. You tend to understand both sides, and yet at the same time you want to make sure that you do not make a judgment or be judgmental. I find that the most difficult part in my life, that where do you draw the line, and things aren't sometimes very clear. Is this side just or is this side just? Do you want to comment on that? Have you experienced that?
I'm sure we all go through moral dilemmas of some kind daily. I don't know what kind of moral dilemmas you go through, but it's alhamdulillah, we've got guidance and that we have to have recourse in. And the fact that the Qur'an gives us the opposite sides, is there personal bias, or is there not personal bias, or is it the way, the procedure it outlines for us? I guess that's something that probably would be there on a case-by-case basis. But no, unfortunately, can't comment.
Assalamu
Go ahead.
alaikum. I have a question. We have charity generally as money giving. What about giving your time? Where does giving your time come as far as Islam is concerned? Does that count as charity as well? And what guidance is there? If we say, oh, we've given money, that's enough, are we encouraged to give of our time as well and helping the needy? Or
So yeah, we've got a hadith that say لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ zakat. Like every single thing has a zakat that you take out from it. Every single thing has a notion of charity or purification for it, right? That's, we may not brand it charity, but something that purifies that. So from our wealth to give out of it is it's a sense of purification for our wealth, that we give out of our wealth. And similarly, for everything that we've been given, for our bodies to use them in to please Allah, for the energy that we have, for the time that we have, so all resources at our disposal, for us to give out of them is a source of purification, increase. So anything that we give out of increases, and I can't see why that would not be the same with time. I'm sure there's somewhere that says, all I can think of right now is لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ zakat, but
thank
makes
you.
sense.
I have a question on this charity and justice, right? And discrimination. So when you look at, for example, the institute Qums, the Same Sadat, and you have this situation whereby, for example, in some of the African countries where we originated, there are hardly any Sadat, yet there's a lot of poverty in these countries. Right? We see money that leaves that country to find Sadats, which are hard to find, and people in that country are deprived and impoverished. So how do we think of justice in that situation?
I can't say that I'm in a position to comment on how funds of Khums and all that is administered in real life, and where it goes and where it shouldn't go and all that, or transparency or accounts, or there's accountability and things like that. It's a whole discussion in its own right.
Funds being only for Sadat when there's poverty in that country.
So when there's poverty in that country, Khums is separate to sadaqah, which is then separate to zakat. Zakat is, we've kind of disregarded zakat, so to speak, simply because, it was outlined that it was on crops and gold and silver, whereas it's on any assets or anything that we have. But that's a separate issue. But we've got, other than Khums, we've also got sadaqah. So, and the charity that we give, Khums is just the prescribed minimum tax, if you like. But as far as charity goes, there's no one to stop us from doing charity or giving extra or giving of our wealth. Oh, I mean bil qist, yeah.
Sister, Assalamu alaikum. Can I ask you a question? You mentioned about just and unjust and justice. The murderers of the Ahlul Bayt family, should they be perpetually be condemned? So where is justice or just or unjust there? Can you explain further on that issue?
Perpetually be condemned, as in, are you talking about la'na?
We are talking about justice, so you exemplify how justice is there.
So, because they're condemned because they were flag bearers of injustice, because of the actions that they committed against the Ahlul, but not just against the Ahlul Bayt. The thing we have to remember is that these stories aren't just, they're not tit for tat, they did this, so we're going to do this. They did this, so we're going to curse them. It's there so that people learn a lesson and they can, essentially see and take moral lesson from that, so they don't perpetuate the same thing. So when we criticize them, or when we condemn them or talk about them, it's not, oh, they did this to our Ahlul Bayt, so we're going to say this. It's not that. It's so that that same injustice is not perpetuated, so people's eyes open.
From that point of view, that I was asking that question, where does the two sentences, the two ayahs you mentioned, how do they come into this effect? I know it's not an easy answer, but I want you to know more from you.
So just,
because you brought up the topic.
that's looking at divine justice. Divine justice is something that we cannot comment on. Allah is al-Muqsit, He's al-Adil, but He's also Rahman and He's Rahim and all the rest of it. So the way He deals with these people is not for us to of how we deal with them. So that's up to Allah's justice. It's not up to us. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Nazmina. Thank you. I sometimes feel that our greatest injustices of our time are systematic. Apartheid, systematic. Slavery, systematic. Even the way Imam Hussein was asked for bay'ah was very systematic of its time. And I think we, as human beings, we are creatures of habit. We are creatures of system. And that is why systematic injustice is very prevalent and leads to great atrocities. Does the Qur'an have anything to say about alleviating systematic injustices? The ayats that you've given are very personal, on a one-on-one basis. But when we're talking about a greater system, what does it say about alleviating systematic injustices?
So again, when you look at Nahj al-Balagha, for example, and what Imam Ali alayhi salam says about that, because obviously he experienced firsthand systematic injustice, right? As to everything that happened from, under his own nose, things were, as systems were put into place, which he had no say over. But again, he singles out certain, he's very specific when he singles out. Even in the Qur'an, I feel like because it talks about these little things, it's easy for us to ignore them, as in they're little things. But I think it starts with the small, and it has to start from a grassroots and go up. But that's just my two-piece worth. I'm not qualified on any level. Call it a day.
Thank you very much for giving us your time, Salwat.